Yes, Liu from Pacific Agri-Science Singapore. I'm here in Orlando at the Agribusiness Global Summit, along with Stephen Pearce. Right, we're going to talk about the changes in the supply chain going forward. And before that, let's hear from Stephen a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Okay. Well, CS, good to see you again, and great to be here at another Agribusiness Global Trade Summit. Always a good place to meet people and find out what's going on, or at least try and find out these days, which I guess we'll discuss here in a bit. But yeah, I guess between last year and this year, set up an investment fund. So we're well on the way to raising our 100 million goal, and starting to deploy capital for innovative ag companies, ag and water tech. Right. Obviously, we're already invested in a distribution business in Africa, so some of the topics we'll discuss today. We're all too painfully aware of some of the changes that need to happen, and trying to be as agile in our own business as possible. So
there's certainly a lot of opportunities for investment. Lots of technologies out there that farmers need, that the supply chain needs, but it's a matter of how good it is, how relevant it is, right? I mean, you guys are right into it in terms of raising capital and deploying the capital towards these new technologies, right? It's good to see that happening, right? So we're going to talk quite a bit today about the changes in the supply chain, where traditionally you have the manufacturers going down to the importers, and then the distributors, national distributors, dealers, and finally to the growers. Now, more and more, I'm seeing companies want to go more directly, suppliers want to go more directly to the big farms. And in fact, in some developing countries such as India, there are also companies talking about going directly to the smaller farmers as well. I know it's a major challenge, but they tend to see some opportunities in that direction. Right? If they have good offerings, they can go down to even the smaller farms and do a two-way kind of trade. I would take your vegetables or your harvest or your fruit, provided you take my whatever inputs.
Like a bartering system.
So I think that may fly. I don't know. We can talk certainly a bit more about that. But let me paint you the current scenario, right? In terms of the international markets, in terms of crop protection. So we have way overproduced generic pesticides, right? Today we're talking about a global industry of 75 billion US dollars, of which 93% are generics. As recent as 20 years ago, we were still talking about 70-30, that kind of ratio, 70% generics, 30% proprietary. Today, we're talking about 93% generics. So you can imagine what that does to the margins, right, in the entire supply chain. And then compounding that, you have overproduction both in China and in India, right? In India, in the last few years, there's been a tremendous number of formulators turning themselves into technical grade manufacturers as well. So, like I said, compounding the overproduction and the fact that now farmers are also complaining they're not making money, leading to all the protests that we saw in Europe, all over Europe at the beginning of this year, right? So you have all these compounding problems and conflicting problems, right? At the farm gate, farmers are saying we're not making money, and yet consumers are saying we're paying so much more for food these days. So you can see that there are so many of these issues that we're facing today that don't seem to make sense. But we're here to talk about how to make sense out of all this, right? So one area that we want to focus on today between you and I is the supply chain, right, in terms of crop inputs. So Steve, what do you think of this scenario that I have painted? Is it more or less what you see as well?
It'd be easy to sum up in one word from a overcapacity issue, and that would be the word insanity, because I cannot see how sustainable a value chain can be in any industry if you've got mass overproduction to the levels that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And that's bad for everybody, right?
Because,
Because
absolutely.
you know, the cost to serve a customer becomes more and more difficult if everybody's working to lower margins.
Right.
Lower margins also mean that there's less money for innovation.
Absolutely.
You know, and there's less.
Absolutely.
You know, if there's less innovation, you have to make do and mend with the tools that you've got, which makes it even harder in places like Europe, for example, where you're getting a lot of chemistries, you know, a lot of revocations without tools to replace them as fast as you know we would like. So yeah, I would say that in the last 18-24 months, we've had a fairly unique set of circumstances. But going forward, you know, you've got so much capacity now. It's a bit like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago with the glyphosate scenario.
Right.
You know, if the price hit a certain point, then, you know, everybody would start producing glyphosate in their small factory again.
Right.
So how margins are going to recover, I'm really not sure yet.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of channel inventories. They're starting to finally clear.
Right.
But you know, how do you build sustainable margins in the value chain with you know the legacy of what we're seeing now? Because you know, if prices start to recover, more people are going to start manufacturing, then the price is going to drop again. So it's going to be very difficult. And from a supply chain perspective, I would assert that if you don't have an agile supply chain where you've got your S&OP process, your sales and operations planning process, so for sales forecast to demand plan to supply plan, supply plan to procurement, you know, your shopping plan, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Because it's going to come back and bite you.
Yes. Now, I said earlier about you know, production at the farmer level, right? You know, with all these gyrations in the marketplace, you have war, you have climate change, you have government legislations imposing upon the farmers, and those were some of the issues that led to all the farmer protests in the first place, right? So now, earlier you mentioned about you know, having less money devoted to R&D because nobody is making money, you know, in the supply chain. But ironically, it's because of all these thin margin situations that is driving some of these innovation, right? To allow the supply chain as well as at the farm level greater efficiencies, right? Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you know,
it's one of the driving forces in terms of, you know, innovation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you know, when you talk about innovation, you know, we're all being asked to do more with less, right? So, you know, in formulation innovation, you know, a lighter chemical footprint, if you like, you know, demands that we start using more precision agricultural tools, and they're you know, they're starting to come. You've got the additional dynamic of, you know, IPM, right? Which is your one of your soapboxes in terms of integrated pest management. You've been doing it for a long time, right?
As I said before, I'm one of the first graduates in IPM from Iowa State University way back in 1979.
There you go. So you're one of the founding fathers of IPM,
we're still a practitioner as well as you know, influencer in that direction.
But you've got this dynamic where traditional let's call it conventional chemistry for want of a more suitable label. The structures and the supply chain, for the most part, are pretty well set, right? When you start looking at integrated pest management, we do a lot of this in our African businesses. You're starting to look at microbials and other things that have a more limited shelf life and require a different kind and a different level of management. And that different kind of management requires a more consultative sale.
Absolutely.
So they're very different. They're very different sales processes. So you start, you know, nesting microbials in with chemistry, like they are in Brazil, for example, right? To manage resistance.
Right.
You've ended up with a very different supply chain being emerging as a result of that, right? So you end up with these, you've got these little biofactories,
right?
Well, let's call them microbreweries, right?
Right.
They've got these fermentation facilities on large farms or in hubs where you can deploy these microbial biological products as part of your resistance management program.
Right.
And you can make them yourselves. And they actually have contractors doing that in Brazil. So those are dynamics that aren't everywhere yet, but they're going to be a consideration.
You see a need to beef up the skill sets of relevant people or stakeholders
100%.
in the supply chain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you are going out there to advise growers today, you're talking about integrated pest management, you're talking about biologicals coming in, mixing with chemicals, right? You're talking about macroorganisms, the good bugs eating the bad bugs, right? Farmers need to know how to use them, right? It's just not a matter of just ordering some of these good bugs and just putting them out in the field. And then the next day you spray chemicals to knock them back.
And we got, there's a lot more focus on regenerative ag. And ecosystems now. Farmers aren't just being asked to produce food; they're being asked to be stewards of the countryside. And all of the things that go with that, right? So, that's a very different beast. I mean, we were in our African business, we work to sort of more full programs. So we don't look at categories in a category management sense across insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, plant growth regulators, or whatever. We have what's called ISPC, and that's invest, strengthen, protect, and then control. So try and get the investment in the germplasm established, minimizing abiotic stress as best you can. You're going to get a stronger plant. Then you can strengthen it with the right nutrition, and get the full value out of the investment you've made in the genetics. You don't see anybody in Formula One putting low octane petrol in their racing car, right? So doing those kinds of things, but using all the tools in a program way. In South Africa, for example, the challenges are, they have a lot of export crops, high value export crops that get sent to Europe. The MRLs, the maximum residue levels, are zero. So they have to manage the end of that period with zero chemicals.
Residue. So that's where I see a lot of demand for these biosolutions. Wherever they export to developed countries such as what you said, Africa exporting to the EU, and then LATAM countries exporting to North America. The farmers have to keep that in mind. And India too, they're talking about being an export powerhouse, for food, right? Which they are. I mean, India exports $11 billion worth of rice a year, and about $50 billion of food in general. And they want to beef that up, but they have to watch chemical residues. Right? So again, beefing up this supply chain of crop inputs would be one way to go, and also to strengthen the knowledge of people, in the supply chain in handling this new scenario, right?
It's a good question.
So I can see what you're saying, for the last 10 or 15 minutes, that they ought to be beefing up of the skill sets. Right.
And it's a function of how you do that, right? So if if you've got some farms, they're 400,000 hectares, that's a totally different value chain, value proposition, knowledge base, right? A lot of these people have their own agronomists in-house, whereas you go to a smallholder, I mean, again, just look at Africa. The whole extension service, well, not all of it, but a lot of the extension service in Africa, the guys that would go and help people, teach them how to do things, that's gone. So people are relying on more digital tools now, right? So you've got things out there like Plantix. So a guy can
just scan and
take a picture, know what it is,
what is the disease,
what the stage is,
and where to go and buy it, whatever the chemical
exactly that
is.
Those are the kinds of tools that are going to become more and more prevalent.
But ironically, these are the tools that will still make the distribution chain relevant, right? I mean, we're talking about all the big guys wanted to go directly to the farms, right? The bigger farms, and then on the defense side, from the reseller and the distributor, what can they do to defend their market?
That's
right?
that's a hot potato right now, isn't it? Because
so they have to make themselves relevant.
Well, I mean, people buy from people,
right?
I mean, and we've got a lot of AI and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I was talking to a patent attorney the other day. He reckons in 30 years' time, AI will be writing its own patents.
Right.
Yeah, but who does the patent litigation when someone infringes a patent, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's all about people at the end of the day. And I think we forget that you've got retail. They have a level of intimacy with their growers, and that's a really important interface.
Right.
But they respond to a grower's demand. But then they'll go to their wholesaler and they expect their wholesaler to be stocking all of the things they need to supply the grower. So generally it's the wholesaler that's getting squeezed from a working capital perspective.
So isn't it ironic? The more they need to stock, the less ability they have to make a decent margin. Right?
And walk around here today and go and ask every single manufacturer if they're prepared to put some skin in the game and put consignment stock on the ground in country, and just see how many would do that. I would hazard a guess it would be near zero, right?
So when we finish talking, the two of us are going to have a walk around.
Okay, we'll take a poll and we'll come back. We'll come back to everybody. But
that question.
They're serious issues because the lower the margins are, the less working capital there is available to keep the whole thing moving. And I think there'll be some critical shifts in wholesalers buying retail. Different things being made, different things happening, people getting smarter with their logistics. I think there'll be less retail outlets. I think there'll be bigger hubs. But ultimately, you have to deliver the right product on time in full. And that is all back to the basics of understanding forecast and building accurate demand plans. And that's getting harder and harder to do with all the changes in the weather, droughts, all the surprises we get.
Just like stress, right? On the crop, you have biotic, you have abiotic. So here you have stresses in the supply chain that are driven by climate changes, climatic conditions, and there are also changes arising out of government policies, wars, right? Sanctions. These are also causing a lot of gyrations, right? In the supply chain. So
I think,
so some you can control, but by and large, lots of
and nothing happens. And nothing happens without water in our business, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think we focus anywhere near enough on water scarcity as something that's always there in the
people
in
often
the background.
Talk about food security, right? I always say that water security, in fact, going forward, is a more significant issue.
And we're deploying capital in water tech a lot more because being able to have access to good, reliable water supply is critical because not only do we not know we're getting more rain, but it's erratic as to where it's falling and how much is falling, and that's getting harder and harder to
and when it is falling, and how much is falling, right? So today you can have a drought situation, tomorrow you can have a flood situation.
I'll go
in the same geography,
3 or 4 hours up the road into Georgia, right? I mean, we had a lot of rain here in Orlando. Tornado warnings. I had something like 20 inches of rain due to fall in 48 hours.
Right.
I mean, how do you manage something like that, right? So
exactly,
it's hard.
And then talking about supply chain consolidation, supply chain changes, they are, again, all these factors that are not controllable that are occurring out there, right? It's making life even more difficult, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
I don't know. Do you see any solutions, any tools that are coming up that are out there in the pipeline?
Well, there's a lot smarter. There's smarter. There's a lot of smart irrigation systems coming out there. We're seeing more of that. I think there's a lot more to be done on integrating some of the digital platforms that there are between satellite, what you can do on the ground, weather stations, algorithms that can start to predict not only we've got all the key indicators for a fungal storm. in this area. I mean, in South Africa, we have to deal. If you go to the Cape, you've got so many microclimates.
Right.
You know, you have to be able to predict what's going to happen. And I think a lot of there should be more of a confluence of these technologies working more in sequence and in parallel, perhaps, to provide more real time,
absolutely,
turning information into actionable insights that you can go and do something as a grower.
The tools for forecast and prediction, right?
Yeah.
I mean, going back to my IPM days, you know, that was one of the factors that are keenly studied, you know, in those days, you know, in terms of predicting when this particular disease is going to hit, right, your apple crop or whatever, you know, based on climatic conditions.
Sure.
You know, way back 40 years, there were already tools available, right? I mean, we have gotten a lot more sophisticated since then, right? So I think we ought to use more of these tools.
I think,
right,
and it's happening. Chain. I mean, you don't see it. You see it more in the high value crops right now because you know it's just I think a lot of these biologicals for them not in all cases they still need to scale to be able to hit some of the price points that you need for row crops. But it'll happen.
Yeah, Stephen, in terms of talking about you know how retailers, wholesalers, distributors can make themselves more relevant and not having their lunches and breakfasts and dinners being eaten up, and in other words, making themselves more relevant. You think that they can beef up some of these services and knowledge that they can disperse to their growers to make themselves relevant? Right?
Sure. I mean,
don't abandon me. You know, I'm supplying you with all the chemicals, but I also have the tools that you need, the technologies that you need, right? We talk about drones as well, and how do you deploy drones to smaller farms? Farmers cannot buy the drones, right? It needs to be dispersed, you know, this drone service, application service by somebody like a distributor in the local area, right? Or dealer.
I mean, you got to be relevant, right? I mean, if it's a transactional platform and as a retailer you're as good as your next price, then there's never going to be the scope to create the level of intimacy that's required to be able to provide the breadth and depth of services that you know you're talking about. I mean, when I grew up, you know, we knew the guy who was coming up the farm drive, right? You know, we had a good relationship with him. So it's really important that you know we continue to maintain the relationships and enable and empower the guys on the front line, you know, the guys walking the crops, looking at these things every day, you know, to be able to do their jobs in a sustainable way. And that's not, you know, that's not always the case. And there's been so much supply chain disruption, you know, so much product has turned up too late for the season.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's about as much use as an Astra on a motorcycle, as we'd say. So it's
ironically, as I said, you know, because of the erosion of margins, nobody can hold a lot of stocks these days. I mean, you ought to hold the stocks, you know, if you want to deliver on time to the farms. But ironically, the margins
lead times are getting longer, right? You've got the logistics
and
guys.
Freight is killing it.
Yeah, freight. You know, you got a lot of guys saying, "Well, I don't want to take dangerous goods on my ship."
Right.
And we learned last night. I mean, it's the captain of the vessel has the final say.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and if
what
he's
to
got
offload and what to carry on.
If he's got a load of foodstuffs or car batteries destined for Europe, he might not want hazardous goods. So it doesn't sail; it stays on port side until it can find another, it can hitch another ride. So those are other issues.
So, Stephen, how do you see manufacturers who are here today in this trade show? You know, be it from India or China, you know, going more directly into the supply chain.
Well, I'd say that
because there's so much competition, there's so much of overproduction or overcapacity anyway. I know some of the capacities are overstated, but I think you have the talk from one party saying that most of the products that are being produced now in China are way overproduced.
I mean, it's way over capacity, right? I mean, it's you know,
even if half of that is correct, it's still a
Still
lot
too
of
much.
capacity. It's still too much.
Yeah, and supply and demand has to come into balance for the margin equation to become sensible again.
Right.
Because, you know, why would you go into a single-digit margin business? You wouldn't do that by intelligent design, would you? So
Yeah.
you know, it
So
has
what
to-
do
it
you
has to
see
pay.
in regard to that situation I mentioned?
Well, it
you know?
drives the wrong behaviors.
Right.
I mean, the companies that have a desire and a strategy to go further, you know, further upstream, well, yeah, great. I mean, if that's you know, but you cease to be a manufacturer at that point,
Right.
You're a backwardly
when
integrated
you
competitor.
compete with your own customers.
That becomes a real issue, right?
Yeah. So they have to wait. Right? I mean, today they have a B2B business, and now they want a B2C because they have registrations, they have their own labels, right? Both in India and China. Some, of course, have made a position very clear. We're just B2B, but the temptation to move to B2C is always there, right?
Yeah.
And some of them are already armed with a lot of registrations and more to come.
Yeah.
They are investing a lot on registrations too, right? So I can see going forward.
No,
there's
it'll become
a
a contentious issue in some places.
Issues,
for sure. But you know, the necessity drives that behavior, right?
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
if you're short on margin, you got to go and find other ways of being able to retain more margin. So you know, you're seeing a lot
cut off the middleman.
Well, you're seeing a lot more formulation infrastructure being built. You know, so you know, you make more margin on a formulated product than maybe just the AI on its own.
Yeah, right.
So, but again, it all comes back to being able to manage demand in a way.
Manage and also innovation, of course, you know, in terms of formulation.
Oh yeah, I mean,
right.
I mean, how many new molecules, you know, are we going to see?
Yeah.
There aren't that you know, that's not, that pipeline is nowhere near what it used to be.
Yeah.
But then there hasn't been the money to invest in those new things, right?
Right. Okay. Now, having said that, the supply chain is sort of shortening, right? So it is definitely happening. You know, I also heard of people who are knocking on the doors of national distributors and they're not getting market access. So now they're thinking of going one level down, right? Instead of chasing after the 15 or 20 national distributors, they're chasing the next layer down, right? So do you see much of that happening in wherever you're operating?
I mean, in our African business, we've done it by what we hope is intelligent design, right? So we go direct to grower in some areas, so like in Mauritius, for example, which isn't a big market, but we'll go direct to, you know, we'll deal directly with the sugar companies,
right?
And then in other markets, we'll have national distributors, and then in other markets, we'll work directly with retail. So it's more of an omni-channel for us, based on how the market is structured and what the market dynamics are. And I think you'll see more of that everywhere. Honestly.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
I mean, if you're a 400,000 hectare operation in Brazil, you know, you're going to command,
yes,
you know, more buying, more buying power.
Talking about that, traditionally in Malaysia, Indonesia, you know, with the big oil palm plantations, rubber plantations, they never buy from the supply chain anyway. You know, they always put whatever they need out on tender basis, right? So they're getting direct supplies.
But if you're going direct to retail, right, your working capital carry is much higher. You've got to be prepared to, one, put the infrastructure in place to be able to serve the customer and be reliable, to be able to maintain that relationship and not be transactional.
Okay.
You know, so it's, you know, it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. So omni-channel, right? It's bound to stay that way, right? I don't think the supply chain is going to wiping out all the distributors and resellers of the world.
We'll see some movement. It's not going to change 180 degrees. But I think in the next 10 years, I think we'll see a very different
the dynamics will be different. The constitution will be different. The kind of products and supplies will be a little bit different, and the level of service they need to deliver to the growers to make themselves relevant will be there, I think, right? So I think going forward, you and I agree that that's the scenario going forward. They're not going to die off. the
No,
supply
no,
chain,
no.
the distributors,
No,
the
look, everyone has to eat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody here has a vested interest
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
protecting
Okay. All right.
protecting food.
Okay. Great. Great talking to you,
Likewise, man.
Stephen.
Good to see you.
All right.
Thanks.
Good to see you.